people think that anti-Semitism is relegated to the realm of the religious. And so those who want to engage in anti-Zionist forms of anti-Semitism are saying, well, this is just about politics. I've always been well aware as a person of Christian faith, right, that my faith doesn't exist without the Jewish faith. What would you do if it were any other group? Would you put out a statement condemning that? If so, that's what you must do. Would you do something else? Would you provide support, education? If so, that's what you must do.
Well, we've all heard the phrase lawfare, legal warfare, and some of the people right in the front line are students on campus leading that fight against anti-Semitism on college campuses. Is our next guest. She's the founding director of the Stand With Us Center for Combating Anti-Semitism, and she's the director of legal policy at Stand With Us. Carly Gammill, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk first about where we are right now on campus. What are some of the things we're seeing, some of the legal challenges, or rather legal support we're giving to the challenges faced by students on campus?
Yeah, well, as you know, anyone who hasn't been living under a rock knows that campuses have been challenging for a number of years, but particularly since October 7th. And since that time, we are seeing things like exclusion of Jewish students, particularly if they identify as Zionists, right? They're not allowed into certain spaces on campus. And that ranges from there all the way up to physical assaults and everything in between. There's curriculum issues, right, where professors are downgrading students, things like that. So pretty much anywhere a student goes on campus these days, they can expect to experience some form of attack against their Jewish identity.
And so what kind of support are we able to give these students legally?
Yeah, it really depends on the situation. But typically what happens is a student reaches out and says, hey, this is what's happening on campus. How can you help me? One of the things that we are seeing actually more and more today that we are helping students navigate is instead of just they are having an issue, right, they're being attacked for their identity, they're having situations turned around on them, right, where if they respond in any way, then the instigator, right, the agitator takes them up as though they've done something wrong and complains to the university. And so now you've got an entire proceeding, which we really look at as a circus, right? But we're having to help them navigate those things because they have real ramifications. And so they really need legal advice as they go through that process on campus. Bigger picture things are things like Title VI investigations, where we will submit a complaint to the United States Department of Education saying, look, things are bad enough here. There's a hostile environment for Jewish students on this campus. And so, this university is receiving federal funding. You need to step in and take a look at what's happening and make sure that they fix that problem. And then obviously we have lawsuits as kind of the final option if things are bad enough.
So if you can, give us an example of a case where we were able to support students in the firing line.
Yeah. So one example, and it's just one of many, but we have a student at a university in California who, in attending an event on campus, was accosted with vile anti-Semitism by one of her professors. In the course of complaining to the university about that and trying to get a remedy, she really quickly realized that she wasn't going to be able to get what she needed from the university without some legal assistance. And so we stepped in and we have been advising her and even connected her with a member of our pro bono attorney network to make sure that the university knows that this student is not alone and they can't bully the student, right? And so once they realize that she has legal help in the process, things do tend to move a little bit more quickly. They become a little bit more formal. There's a response that maybe there wasn't before. And so we are still in the process. These things do take time. But again, that's a support that these students know that they have in Stand With Us. And we're people who understand the legalities behind this, right? It's not just a student going up against kind of the machine of the institution. And so that, like I said, that's just a common occurrence and one of many.
What's the caseload look like for the Stand With Us legal department in this post-October the 7th world?
I can say it is immense. It is intense. We have increased the intake to the legal department by about 400%. In the immediate aftermath of October 7th, and those numbers are not dwindling at this point. It looks a little bit different, right, because you have some universities that are actually getting on board now that funding is being threatened and things like that. But I think on average, we have around 5 new requests for legal assistance on a daily basis.
And how'd you meet that need?
Yeah, well, thankfully, we have been able to grow our legal team to meet the need. As much as we wish the need weren't there, we actually have gone from 2 attorneys who were handling, the initial aftermath. It was like drinking from a fire hose right after October 7th. And now instead of just the 2 of us, we have 6 full-time attorneys and 2 part-time attorneys, as well as, like I said, this robust pro bono attorney network across the country in the United States.
Yeah, many hundreds of pro bono attorneys giving support and help.
Yeah, absolutely, and invaluable, really. And I will say this, and really to their credit, many of them were already part of our network when October 7th happened. Afterward, a couple of things. Many of them said, we want to be more involved. Let us get involved. And not just solo practitioners, right? A number of individuals at large law firms saying, let us put our resources behind the work that needs to be done here. And in fact, a couple of the new attorneys that we have on staff came to us specifically after October 7th. They had been practicing law elsewhere and said, you know what? We have to be involved in helping to protect and support the Jewish community.
Amazing, and good for them. And I know that, much of the pro-Israel activity is very well organized, it's very well financed, and it's led by front organizations such as SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, JVP, so-called Jewish Voice for Peace.
Right.
What can be done towards these education? What kind of action can be taken towards these organizations when they cross over that line, as they do so frequently, into creating a violent anti-Semitic atmosphere on campus?
Yeah, well, like I said, it runs the gamut. It depends what they do. But even just their rhetoric sometimes, people think of in the United States of, oh, well, that's just free speech, right? That's protected and there's nothing you can do about that. Well, that's actually not the case. If we're talking about a campus that receives federal funding in the United States, just because the speech itself that is involved may be protected, and that's a question, but often, yes, offensive and vile, bigoted speech is protected. But the way that they go about engaging in the speech often turns into harassment. Well, that's not protected conduct. And so universities have a responsibility to look at the entire situation and say, okay, just because we may not be able to punish the fact that they said X, right, which was an attack against Jewish identity, they've now created a hostile environment, an environment in which Jewish students are not able to fully and freely engage in the activities and programs of our university, right? And so if that's the case, they have an obligation as a recipient of federal funding to address that entire environment, right, and to remedy it, to make sure that it doesn't continue and to fix whatever the effect of that hostility is. And so that really is a large part of what we at Stand With Us are doing, is helping those students to make sure that the environment is improved, right, for themselves, but also for the Jewish students who come after them.
And the definition of anti-Semitism is so important, isn't it? What do you find are misconceptions among university administrations about what anti-Semitism really is?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times what we find is that people think that anti-Semitism is relegated to the realm of the religious, right? Jewish identity in many people's minds is strictly religious. And if you think that, then you are missing the peoplehood aspect of Jewish identity, the shared ancestry component. Many people use the term Zionism for that, right? And so what happens is, and has happened through a well-funded, intentional campaign, the term Zionism, which again, for Jews, means, hey, this is my shared ancestry, right? Israel is my indigenous ancestral homeland, and so I have a connection to that on a personal level, right? What's happened, though, is that has become a political issue, right? And so those who want to engage in anti-Zionist forms of anti-Semitism are saying, well, this is just about politics. And so many administrators, and we also have to acknowledge, many of the administrators on campus now are products of a campus environment that has taught this for years. And so if you think of Zionism as purely politics, then you're missing a large component of Jewish identity. And thus, when that aspect of Jewish identity is attacked, administrators say, oh, well, that's just about politics. That's a political disagreement. And so a lot of the education that we do at Stand With Us, including through the legal department, is helping administrators to understand that, yes, there is a religious component to Jewish identity, but there is also this peoplehood, shared ancestry component. And when that identity aspect is attacked, you have to respond in equal measure as you would when any other group's identity is attacked. So, I can tell you firsthand, I have seen that light bulb go on in rooms where we are giving that education and helping administrators to understand that reality. You see that light bulb go on and they start asking meaningful questions exactly along those lines of, okay, if that's the case, then when one of these things happens and a Jewish student comes to us, what should we be doing? And the answer is, well, what would you do if it were any other group? Would you put out a statement condemning that? If so, that's what you must do. Would you do something else? Would you provide support, education? If so, that's what you must do. And so we really are focusing on helping administrators and other, kind of decision makers understand the equal nature and of the treatment of the Jewish students and how that's required and but you first have to understand when the identity is under attack in the first place.
Really important to educate the educators, I guess, and educate the administrators, not just on the university campus, but in other spheres as well. And I know that's a job that the StandWithUs Center for Combating Anti-Semitism is doing, really important. Let me ask you, we're talking here in Jerusalem. We're in Israel right now, not your first visit. But how did you get to be here, and what guides your activism personally?
Yeah, so for me, it's both personal and professional. You know, your life happens and you start one place and you never know exactly where you're going to end up. But I've always been well aware as a person of Christian faith, right, that my faith doesn't exist without the Jewish faith. And so, you know, it's kind of mind-boggling to me when people don't understand, have no concept that Zionism is related to Jewish identity, because for me, that's always been a no-brainer, right? But part of that is because I know the term Zion, right? I know it's an actual physical location that is, you know, so important to the history of the Jewish people. And so, you know, I bring that with me. But in the professional sense, when I was practicing law initially at the law firm that I started at, my boss was Jewish and very invested in the people of Israel and supporting Israel. And so when BDS, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions campaigns started arising in earnest on college campuses, those became part of my portfolio. That's the one piece I can't really give an answer to. I don't know why me. I'm thankful, though. And so really I was able to begin working very closely with the Jewish community. I was representing students and professors who were finding themselves, you know, kind of on the wrong end of BDS activity, disruptions of events, things like that, which involve violation of First Amendment rights. And, you know, there's non-discrimination laws that come into play. And so I was beginning to do those things. So fast forward in, I think it was 2014, 2015, StandWithUs was hosting its first ever kind of national conference. It's now called our international conference. At the time, it was a BDS conference. And I realized, you know, I need to be there in that room. I need to understand better. And so that was my introduction to StandWithUs. And several years later, here I am.
And of course, people can report anti-Semitic incidents via StandWithUs.com.
Absolutely.
Carly Gammill, thanks for all that you're doing, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.